the shadowed annals of monarchy, where crowns conceal the grotesque, Ferdinand VII of Spain reigned as a sovereign whose very anatomy twisted the threads of destiny into a tapestry of horror. What unholy curse could render a king's most intimate union not an act of passion, but a prelude to terror and excremental despair? Here lies the tale of a monarch whose physical aberration, whispered in medical tomes as macrogenitosomia, transformed the royal bedchamber into a chamber of revulsion, defying the sanctity of noble bloodlines and exposing the moral rot beneath gilded thrones. Long veiled by the decorum of history, this saga unveils the depraved underbelly of power, where innocence shattered against the monstrous, and a nation's fate hung upon the frailties of flesh. A revelation emerges from the dust of forgotten letters and courtly scandals, promising shadows deeper than mere tyranny. If such chronicles of the macabre intrigue, consider subscribing for more descents into history's abyss, and share your reflections in the comments below. In the opulent yet stifling confines of Madrid's royal palace, on a chill October evening in 1819, a virginal bride awaited her fate with the innocence of one schooled solely by cloistered nuns. Maria Josefa Amalia of Saxony, scarcely 16, clutched her rosary like a talisman against the unknown, her mind untainted by whispers of carnal mysteries, believing, in her convent-bred naivety, that infants emerged from the stalks of reeds rather than the throes of human union. The chamber, heavy with the scent of incense and trepidation, bore witness to an event that would etch itself into the shadowed corridors of Spanish history. As the door groaned ajar, the figure that emerged shattered any illusions of chivalric romance. Ferdinand VII, King of Spain, age 35, lumbered forth, a corpulent silhouette burdened by gout, his features coarsened by protruding lips and eyes that gleamed with predatory intent. Yet it was not his corporeal bulk that chilled the young queen's blood to ice. Afflicted by a rare and grotesque malformation, termed macrogenitosomia in the clinical tomes of the era, Ferdinand's anatomy defied nature's design. Chroniclers, drawing from the discreet testimonies of royal physicians and foreign envoys, described it in hushed revulsion, slender as a taper at its root, swelling to the girth of a clenched fist at its extremity, elongated akin to a billiard cue. This aberration, far from a boon, rendered the act of consummation a peril fraught with agony. Confronted by this monstrosity, Maria Josefa recoiled in primal horror, fleeing the marital bed with cries that pierced the palace silence. Ferdinand, inflamed by wine and unbridled lust, pursued her in a grotesque farce, a ponderous monarch stumbling through the chamber, his quarry a fleet-footed maiden, evading what she perceived as demonic assault. Thwarted and enraged, he erupted from the room in utter nakedness, his deformity brazenly exposed, bellowing invectives at the queen's attendants, branding them beasts and harlots, demanding they ready her for his claim within a quarter hour. The hapless ladies, including kin of the bride, endeavored to soothe the terrified girl, imparting, in veiled terms, the grim necessities of wedlock. Their words, however well-intentioned, amplified her dread to cataclysmic proportions. Upon Ferdinand's return, primed to assert his sovereign prerogative, he encountered not submission, but olfactory assault that no courtly perfume could veil. In her abject panic, Maria Josefa had surrendered control of her faculties, soiling the nuptial sheets with the effluvia of fear. The king, recoiling in aristocratic disdain, proclaimed that queens ought not emit the odor of civet, and retreated in fury, shunning her touch for days thereafter. This debacle, immortalized in diplomatic dispatches and papal archives, exposed the fragility of royal unions, where physical anomaly intertwined with psychological torment. Physicians' records, penned by the likes of Dr. José María de la Fuente, attested to the impossibility of normal congress without inflicting grievous harm upon the consort. The shape itself, an aberration likened to a medieval instrument of torment, ensured that what should have been an intimate rite devolved into a spectacle of suffering. Yet this wedding night horror was but the overture to a symphony of depravity that had festered in Ferdinand's soul since youth. To fathom the depths of Ferdinand's affliction, one must retreat to the shadowed dawn of his princely years, where innocence curdled into aberration amid the opulent decay of Bourbon Spain. Born in 1784 to Charles IV and Maria Luisa of Parma, the young heir apparent bore the weight of dynastic expectations upon a frame already marred by hereditary frailties, the inbred curses of Habsburg and Bourbon lineages manifesting in physical and temperamental distortions. Whispers from court physicians, preserved in archival missives, suggest that his grotesque condition emerged in adolescence, a malformation that rendered him an object of pity and derision, even within the gilded walls of Aranjuez Palace. At the tender age of 17, in 1802, Ferdinand entered his first matrimonial bond, wedding his cousin, Maria Antonia of Naples, a union orchestrated to secure alliances, yet doomed by the prince's anatomical enigma. The wedding night unfolded not in ecstasy, but in fumbling inadequacy. Chronicles recount how the groom merely ogled his bride, prodding at her form with the uncertainty of one ignorant of nature's mechanics. For 11 interminable months the marriage languished unconsummated. Ferdinand's arousal thwarted by a physiology that defied conventional congress. His organ, described in Maria Antonia's anguished letters as an insurmountable barrier, transformed the bedchamber into a theatre of frustration. Her mother, Queen Maria Carolina, penned frantic epistles to Madrid, lamenting her daughter's nightly tears and the prince's impotence. Attempts yield no pleasure, no effect. The situation is extraordinary and pitiable for whosoever lies at his side. Humiliation rippled through Europe's courts like a venomous tide. The Spanish successor, branded a sexual incompetent, required ecclesiastical intervention. A royal confessor, compelled to elucidate the rudiments of copulation to a future monarch. When consummation finally occurred, the consequences proved catastrophic. Maria Antonia endured 2 miscarriages, her fragile constitution ravaged, likely by internal lacerations inflicted by her husband's deformity, and she succumbed at the age of 21 in 1806, her body a vessel broken upon the rocks of royal duty. Yet from this abyss of inadequacy arose a monstrous inversion. The death of his first consort unshackled Ferdinand from marital constraints, igniting an obsession that warped his soul. The prince who once faltered in the shadows of ignorance now embraced his anomaly as a badge of virility, his frustrations fermenting into a rapacious hunger that would devour the moral fabric of his realm. This transformation, however, heralded an era where personal vice bled into national catastrophe, as Ferdinand ascended amid the ruins of Napoleonic occupation. Upon reclaiming the throne in 1814, following the expulsion of Napoleonic forces, Ferdinand VII, now a man of 30, seething with pent-up frustrations, unleashed a torrent of vice that stained the very soul of Spain. The absolute monarch, drunk on reclaimed authority, transformed the nocturnal streets of Madrid into his private domain of debauchery. Cloaked in darkness, he would steal from the palace shadows, accompanied by a cadre of dissolute aristocrats, to frequent the most infamous houses of ill repute. Chief among them was the establishment presided over by Pepa la Malagueña, a den so steeped in notoriety that the virtuous averted their gaze when passing its threshold. Here, amid the haze of cheap wine and flickering candlelight, Ferdinand revelled in his anomaly, parading it as a grotesque emblem of prowess. Eyewitness accounts, preserved in the discreet journals of courtiers and diplomats, paint a scene of unbridled perversion. The king, once humiliated by his form, now orchestrated contests of measurement among his companions, each man bearing himself in a ritual of vulgar comparison, where Ferdinand invariably triumphed, earning the mocking sobriquet El Bien Dotado, the well-endowed one. He strutted through these squalid chambers, his deformity on brazen display, boasting of conquests that blurred the line between consent and coercion. Yet, this exhibitionism paled beside his most abhorrent fixation, a compulsion to collect relics of deflowered innocence. As confided to confidants like Count José María de Villalobos, Ferdinand derived exquisite pleasure from possessing virgins, thereafter hoarding the stained linens as trophies, bloodied proofs of his dominance, amassed with the zeal of a connoisseur curating rarities. These grim mementos extended beyond the brothel's confines, trailing Ferdinand across the realm like a plague of ruin. Widows in Aranjuez, peasant maidens in Segovia, palace servants bound by fealty, all fell prey to his predations, their essences added to his secret archive. Meanwhile, Spain crumbled under the weight of neglect. The empire's American colonies, ignited by revolutionary fervor, slipped irrevocably from grasp, birthing independent nations amid bloodshed and economic hemorrhage. Liberal reformers, daring to envision a constitutional dawn, met the scaffold by the thousands, Ferdinand's inquisitorial zeal extinguishing enlightenment with the garrote and firing squad. The treasury withered, famine stalked the provinces, and unrest simmered like a cauldron on the boil. Yet the king remained indifferent, his nights devoted to carnal hunts, his days to tyrannical decrees, as if the nation's agony fueled his private excesses. This era of moral eclipse, where personal indulgence mirrored political decay, set the stage for Ferdinand's desperate quest for legitimacy through further matrimonial bonds, unions that would compound tragedy with engineered desperation. In the decaying splendor of Spain's royal court, Ferdinand VII, a king marred by grotesque deformity, sought an heir through a second marriage, heedless of the ruin he sowed. In 1816, he wed his niece, Maria Isabel of Braganza, a mere 20 years old, cast as a dynastic pawn. Her nights became a crucible of torment, as Ferdinand's macrogenitosomia, an aberration likened to a medieval instrument of pain, rendered intimacy a brutal ordeal. Court physicians, in hushed ledgers, noted crude attempts to ease her suffering with cushions, yet no device could shield her from the king's indifference, his heart tethered to Madrid's brothels. In 1818, a premature birth ended in tragedy. Maria Isabel perished at 21 during a merciless caesarean, her screams a haunting requiem for royal ambition. Undaunted, Ferdinand turned to Maria Josefa Amalia of Saxony, whose infamous 1819 wedding night had already scarred history. Her convent-bred innocence became a shield, her prayers a defiant litany against the king's monstrous advances. Despite papal decrees urging submission, she resisted, yielding a childless decade. By 1829, at 25, she succumbed, officially to fever, though whispers spoke of a spirit broken by dread. The court, meanwhile, sank deeper into moral rot, Ferdinand's nocturnal hunts staining the palace with vice. His collection of bloodied linens grew, each cloth a trophy from violated innocence, drawn from servants, peasants, and daughters of fallen foes. Spain's empire crumbled, its treasury bled dry, yet Ferdinand, enthralled by debauchery, remained blind to the chaos. This reign of vice set the stage for a final union that would briefly salvage his lineage, at an unthinkable cost. In the twilight of his reign, Ferdinand VII, a monarch consumed by vice, sought salvation in a fourth bride, Maria Cristina, of Bourbon II Sicilies. Wed in 1829, this pragmatic queen, aged 23, navigated the king's grotesque deformity with chilling ingenuity. Aware of the peril posed by his macrogenitosomia, she employed a specially crafted cushion, a grim contrivance that mitigated the agony of conjugal duty. Her resolve bore fruit. 2 daughters, Isabella II and Luisa Fernanda, secured the Bourbon lineage, a fleeting triumph amid a reign of ruin. Yet Maria Christina's pragmatism could not shield her from Ferdinand's nocturnal wanderings as he continued to haunt Madrid's squalid brothels, amassing his perverse collection of blood-stained linens, each marked with the names and dates of his prey. This grotesque archive, uncovered after Ferdinand's death in 1833, revealed the breadth of his predation. From palace maids to daughters of executed liberals, none were spared his rapacious hunger. These relics, meticulously catalogued, stood as a testament to a king who wielded power as a license to defile. His final act of defiance, the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, allowed his daughter Isabella II to inherit, igniting the First Carlist War, a bloody schism that tore Spain asunder, claiming countless lives in a struggle over succession. Ferdinand's indifference to his realm's agony was absolute. While colonies fell and famine gripped the land, he curated his trophies, oblivious to the empire's collapse. The court, a cesspool of sycophancy, abetted his depravity, turning a blind eye as Spain bled. Maria Cristina, navigating a viper's nest, preserved her daughter's claim, but inherited a tainted legacy. Ferdinand's death left behind a nation fractured and a dynasty teetering, his perverse obsessions etched into the annals of infamy. Yet the true cost of his reign lay not in battles lost, but in the silent scars of his nameless victims, whose suffering whispered of a deeper rot. In the shadowed ledger of history, Ferdinand VII of Spain emerges not as a sovereign of grandeur, but as a crowned predator, whose grotesque form and unchecked power wove a tapestry of horror. His reign, stained by macrogenitosomia and moral decay, transformed royal bedchambers into arenas of torment and the palace into a den of vice. The bloodied linens he hoarded, silent relics of defiled innocence, bear witness to a king who mistook dominion for a mandate to destroy. His legacy, embodied in the fractured reign of Isabella II and the carnage of the Carlist War, reveals a bitter truth. Power, divorced from humanity, births monsters cloaked in majesty. Spain's empire crumbled, its people suffered, yet Ferdinand's true victims were the nameless women whose anguish fueled his depravity, their stories buried beneath the weight of royal myth. This saga of a king's perversion serves as a stark admonition. Unchecked authority festers into tyranny, and the pursuit of personal gratification can doom a nation. The Bourbon dynasty, tarnished by Ferdinand's excesses, staggered toward its eventual collapse, a cautionary tale etched in blood and ruin. As the echoes of his atrocities fade, the silenced voices of his victims linger, a haunting reminder of the cost of power unchecked. For those drawn to the shadowed corners of history, consider subscribing to uncover more tales of humanity's darkest hours, and share your thoughts in the comments below.